It's Spooktober! You know what that means. Candy, costumes, and carnage.
Well, not that last one. Sorry. But yeah, despite not being a party person, I love Halloween. I love horror shows, movies, as well as seeing the costumes most people make and wear. With cosplayers and costume designers constantly upping the ante, you can potentially see anything on Halloween. Which brings me to fighting games. In the same way most people expect scary stuff on Halloween, players expect to see combat-oriented or superpowered characters from martial artists to sorcerers. As you all may know, that isn't always the case. More than likely, you've seen a character in a fighting game and thought, how in any sort of universe did they make this a fighting game character? You'd think some of these characters were just weird people in goofy Halloween costumes. These are 10 people and things that are somehow fighting game characters. Number 10, a sleepy person. Attentiveness and focus are immensely important in combat. Having a considerable lack of either pretty much puts you in instant danger of taking a bunch of hits or even possibly getting knocked out quickly. Meet KOF's Maiden-kun, who chases away that tidbit of wisdom just as quickly as he chases and catches Z's. While Cody, before becoming the mayor, used to whine about how his opponents made him sleepy, this kid legit fights people while sleepy. His sensei Tung Fu-Ru named his fighting style Hakyo Kumenbinken, or the 8 Extremities Sleepy Fist, which has some similarities with Drunken Fist, except it appears more like chamomile tea was involved rather than sake. To further emphasize his drowsy demeanor, his weapon of choice is a pillow. While the thought of him smacking the likes of Geese Howard around with a pillow might sound laughable, it's worth noting that he can infuse his chi into it, making it a pretty effective projectile. Additionally, Maiden-kun draws his chi energy from the Mother Earth goddess Gaia. So yeah, I would mock him saying something like,
What do you think this is? A slumber party pillow fight?
While one of the last people I would expect to see in competitive combat is a dozy person, Maiden-kun makes it work. Dialogue between him and his best friend Shunei suggests that Maiden-kun has beaten him every time they've sparred. Keep in mind, Shunei is the main protagonist of the current KOF story arc. All of this, plus being known as Tung Fu-Ru's secret weapon, should be enough to convince you that he's much more of a threat than his demeanor suggests. Number 9, a lawyer. Before you even think it, no, I'm not talking about She-Hulk. Granted, she is a lawyer, nothing pertaining to said perfection was reflected in her fighting style. With that being said, you all know who I'm talking about. Phoenix Wright, the main protagonist of the Ace Attorney series. I was just as excited as Lythero when they confirmed that he would be in Ultimate Marvel vs. Capcom 3. A mystery much bigger and difficult than Rise from the Ashes, many players wondered how Wright would fit in a fighting game. This wasn't really the first time a non-combat based character would be shoehorned into the Capcom Vs. series, as Mega Man's sister Roll appeared in Marvel 1 and 2 and Tatsunoko vs. Capcom. The latter had Roll with a more unique style based around her role as a housekeeper rather than weaker copycat versions of her brother's moves. While a housekeeping robot could also have made this list, Roll at least makes her broomstick bow staff work as a weapon. Phoenix Wright doesn't really have anything like that. The closest thing he has to an item identifiable with him is his attorney badge, which is in no way, shape, or form a weapon. Phoenix isn't much of a fighter either. He does seem to be super resilient, which is usually attributed to his unbelievable luck. In the middle of winter, he fell from a 40-foot cliff into a fast-flowing river whose victims are never recovered. Not only did they find him, but he was only bedridden for 2 nights with a fever. As we all know, Capcom made Phoenix Wright work, with a bunch of hilarious non-attacking attacks and a killer level 3 that they initially botched,
Take this!
but thankfully corrected later on. Number 8, a football player. This one is a bit strange. We've seen quite a few athletes that would easily fit into fighting games. Boxers and wrestlers may all instantly come to mind. You'd have to be in the perfect place in Bizarro World to find someone who instantly mentions a football player. On one hand, it kinda makes sense. Football players do tend to be rough, tough, and/or buff. The sport also involves lots of intense physical contact and agility. So, doesn't seem all too strange for a football player to be a fighter. Just look at this guy. However, something just seems kinda weird coming to compete in a martial arts tournament dressed in a football uniform. That's what Johnny Maximum did. He enjoys football for how violent the sport is, and joined the World Heroes tournament for the sake of having more people to inflict pain upon. Well, at least he kinda has a fighting spirit. Also, they did a pretty good job at making him look badass, particularly with his shadowy face and red eyes. I almost thought he was a cyborg. Also, his shoulder charging and tackling could pass as fighting game attacks. The football projectiles are weird though. Is that supposed to be his chi? It's kinda sorta cool that he kicks them, but really though? Then again, maybe it's not as bad as number 7, basketball players. Sean Matsuda doesn't count here. Yeah, I know he had that special basketball projectile and he loves the sport, but you know as well as I do they didn't base his whole fighting style around his love for basketball. He was a Shodown clone. The two, and yes I said two, characters we're looking at here fit into the vein of basket brawlers. Let's start with the more relatively obscure Bobby Nelson. This character from Aggressors of Dark Combat is also a Shodown clone, kinda. His Shoryuken basically has him jumping in the air, spinning with both hands on his basketball as if he's going for a slam dunk. His Tatsu has him holding the ball out with both hands as well as sticking a leg out as he spins toward the opponent, striking them multiple times. The obvious difference between him and Sean is that Bobby practically has that basketball in both of his hands magnetized. Every punch basically has him striking his opponent with it. What's even crazier is Bobby is the only character in this game that uses a weapon. Yes, the basketball. Then there's Lucky from King of Fighters. While he didn't have a basketball surgically attached to his hands, he did have a reliable way of summoning them from the sky at will. Also, he was able to use his basketballs to create pillars of energy. Okay. The one basketball themed move of his that doesn't look silly in combat is his dodge. Interestingly, Lucky also had some karate moves mixed into his repertoire, which were a shout out to Kareem Abdul-Jabbar's fighting style in the Bruce Lee film Game of Death. While basketball isn't as hard hitting as football, the importance of agility in the game could be applicable to combat as well as mind games. Still, who would have thought of making basketball players as fighting game characters? SNK. That's who. Number 6, a tank. After Arc System Works' presentation of BlazBlue Cross Tag Battle 2.0 at EVO 2019, two things stuck with me. One, my prediction of there being no more Ruby characters coming to the game was further buried, even though that big data mine had already doomed said prediction. And two, I am so going to main Blitz Tank. Now I'll admit, I don't know all that much about Akatsuki Blitzkampf. I had first learned of the game's existence when I had learned Akatsuki was a guest character in Under Night and Birth EXE late. I never dug any deeper than that. After Akatsuki and Blitz Tank were revealed, I've started to delve more into the lore. With all that being said, a tank in a fighting game? On top of that, a playable character. You'd think something like this would be an unplayable, annoying boss character. Usually when you think of tanks in video games, you think of shooters or even boss characters in adventure and RPG games. Fighting games though, nah. Then again, this is an anime fighter. Number 5, a car. More vehicles? I get robots and cyborgs, but sheesh. And I can't even use the anime fighter excuse this time. This one comes courtesy of one of the classic crossover fighters, Fighters Mega Mix. Well, actually this one comes courtesy of a classic racing game, Fighters Mega Mix was yet a massive crossover of 3D Sega franchises. the roster consisted of mostly Virtua Fighter and Fighting Vipers characters. Then you had some outliers, most of whom came from non-fighting games. Arguably the weirdest was straight out of Daytona! Clearly they really wanted to represent Daytona USA in this game, and having some stages just wasn't enough. So they took the Hornet car, slapped on the armor mechanic from Fighting Vipers, and thus Fighters Mega Mix had a fighting car on the roster. At least the Blitz tank is made for combat with its bombs and projectiles. Hornet is just hilarious. With its tires functioning as its hands and feet, it does get on all fours and runs into the opponent, which is totally bound to cause some damage. Then there's its grab, in which it grasps the opponent with two of its tires and accelerates. It sounds brutal, but it looks goofy. I don't see how Sega made this work, but they did. Number 4, a chicken. This isn't a joke, it isn't a troll, and it most definitely isn't a guy in a chicken suit. It's an actual, legit, 100% living, flacking, bukkake chicken. Bonus points for anyone that remembers Mace: The Dark Age. Taking place in the 12th century, the roster consists of assassins, mercs, a harem girl, an executioner, and so on. Looking at this game, you can clearly tell it has dark overtones, which makes it all the more surprising that there is a chicken on the roster. The character in question, Pojo, do you get it, is actually a hidden character. You unlock her by utilizing the sorceress Taria's execution move, which is basically this game's version of Mortal Kombat fatalities, which involves her turning the opponent into a chicken. Pojo fights like a killer chicken, having very swift overall movement and harassing the opponent with a bunch of pecking and hopping. She even has projectiles in the form of eggs. I'm sure you saw that coming. Additionally, she has a very powerful technique in which she slams the ground, unleashing flames that emit from all around her, and somehow not getting fried. Finally, for her execution move, she pulls a Merkava and flies away with her opponent. Seeing all the other characters are full-grown humans, that's gotta be embarrassing. Also, while this character is clearly meant to be a joke, Pojo's actually a very hard counter to the final boss, Asmodeus, due to most of his attacks completely whiffing on her because of her size. That's basically Mace: The Dark Age's secret chicken fighter in a nutshell, or an eggshell. Sorry about that. Also, Pojo's arcade ending is worth looking into. It's pretty funny. I know my chicken, you got to know your chicken. And if you know what song that is, I love you eternally. Number 3, a cactus. You know, I'm pretty sure you know with almost every fighting game, there are characters with fireballs. You might have heard of those. This alone makes me wonder how a plant could possibly be a fighting game character. I guess if some form of mutant shrubbery was going to be a fighting game character, it would be something like a cactus. Could imagine one shooting spines all over the place. That'd be pretty sick. Anyway, here's a Mingo. That random wacky cactus decked out in stereotypical Mexican garb that made his first ever appearance in the critically acclaimed Marvel vs. Capcom 2. Interestingly, that game is also his only fighting game appearance so far, and I cannot imagine him popping up in anything else nowadays. Rumor has it a Mingo was set to feature in a future Capcom game. It was scrapped for unknown reasons, and likewise the name and concept of the game are also unknown. I could actually see a goofy Venus flytrap being a fighting game character, but of course, Plants vs. Zombies has that on lock. A Mingo's powers include growing into something that looks like a spiky beanstalk and absorbing the opponent only to do a little dance before spitting them out. Why? A Mingo's much cooler animations include him forming a drill with his feet, deploying mini Amingos, and him blocking attacks with his chest like he's so manly. Ugh. Amingo is lucky the only fighting game he's appeared in is considered legendary. Number 2, a green bean. From 2 straight vehicles to 2 straight plant-based characters dressed in stereotypical Mexican attire, and this one is super lame. There is no reason a green bean should be a fighting game character. I don't care if it is anthropomorphic. That's not a character. That's a free meal. As we journey back to Fighters Mega Mix, They were pretty weird, weren't they? Similar to Amingo, yet again, this thing known as Deku was an original character created from scratch. He's an air quotes comical green bean that has no comedy appeal, no interesting features, and at this point, I'm confident he has no flavor. Pun intended. He has an Easter egg in which a bird hiding under his hat will chirp if he wins a match when his hat is knocked off. When this happens in his alternate costume, I don't even care enough to say it. Look it up if you, the one person in this universe that finds this character cool, wants to know. If you think it's just me that doesn't give 1/100th of a crap about this character, this is a GIF on Deku's page on the Fighters Generation website. I rest my case. Number 1, nearly all the characters in Clay Fighter. Yeah, I know Clay Fighter is a parody fighting game, but they really took it to berserko blastorama levels of loopy with much of its characters. I feel it kinda gave signature weirdness of anime fighters a run for their money. Seeing there are a bunch of characters, I'll just point out the most oddball ones that I couldn't believe are fighting game characters. While there have been many cryomancers in fighting games, I never thought I'd see a snowman as a character. Seeing how rather frail the likes of Frosty the Snowman were in those Christmas specials, I figured a snowman wouldn't fit. Then came Bad Mr. Frosty. I always figured knocking his head off would end the fight instantly. Next there was a blob named, well, Blob. Creativity level? Not even trying. For a parody, that's super appropriate. Change Slime's great uncle specializes in transforming into items to attack his opponent. He calls it Goo-Jitsu. I always and still think that's funny even today. Then there was Taffy, a piece of taffy, who was basically Candy Dawson with his stretchy limbs and range. I would say this would be someone else that could be easily defeated by being eaten, but I feel like mutant stretchy taffy might be kind of horrifying to people. Finally, there's the end boss, named End Boss. Hey, blame the creators for this one, not me. End Boss was a necklace. Of all the crazy stuff we've seen fighting game bosses become, I never thought it would come to this. Ever! A necklace warrior. You know, I think I may have found who's responsible for the generation of item Pokemon. And that's my list. Know of any other people or things that you thought wouldn't be fighting game characters but somehow are? Let me know in the comments. Thank you for watching this, and I hope you have a spooky, happy, safe Halloween. See ya!